All for coming this morning. I know there were a couple of accidents and things that might have kept you delayed, but I really appreciate you joining. Today we're going to talk about leveraging artificial intelligence for the future of industrial organizational psychology. Imagine the fashion industry without sewing machines. Imagine production lines without robotic arms and conveyor belts. Imagine the publishing industry without Microsoft Word, without spell check, without Grammarly. Imagine only typing on a typewriter at a stationary desk. Imagine your cell phone just an analog device, only used to make phone calls. Doesn't that seem archaic? Doesn't it seem like a world so far in our past that it's unimaginable? The reality is, the phone has only become the device you see it today 20 years ago, or the iPhone is really only 16 years old. But I can't imagine a world where the phone wasn't in the palm of my hands a computer. The reality is, when all of these inventions were created, people were in an uproar. When sewing machines became a part of everyday life, seamstresses felt like their jobs were being taken from them. They boycotted the use of a sewing machine because they thought it was going to put them out of a job. But does anyone know what actually happened? Sewing machines actually created more jobs. Why did it do that? Because seamstresses were no longer stitching by hand. What a sewing machine did for them was make them complete garments faster, which means they needed more seamstresses because they had the ability to produce faster. When robotic arms were introduced on the assembly lines in the auto industry, union workers boycotted for weeks because they thought robots were going to replace them. I'll ask again, does anybody know what actually happened?
They got more work.
Sorry?
They got more work too.
Exactly. They actually became more human-focused instead of more mundane-focused. What does that mean? Instead of using human strength to screw in a bolt, they used robotic arms to screw in that bolt. And here's the kicker, they didn't get tired. But the humans had an opportunity to shift their focus from screwing in bolts to being quality control. They became more critical thinkers, because that's what we are. We are critical thinkers. So for me, IO psychology is not going to be replaced. It will not replace, artificial intelligence will not replace us as IO psychologists. In fact, I think we're going to leverage it for our future. So, now that I have your attention, I'll introduce myself. My name is Christine McHale, or your organizational psychologist with the McHale Consulting Group. I launched my own firm 4 years ago in August of 2020, yes, in the height of the pandemic. No one was really hiring IO psychologists, but I really wanted to create a path for myself as an IO psychologist to help organizations leverage the massive change that was happening around us. We were going through so much change, and every day was a different thing that we didn't know how to address. And so I launched my firm with the focus on change management, organizational design and structure, and leadership development. Because what we needed more than anything during COVID was leadership, and confident leadership. So my firm launched with those key principles in mind. One of the missions that I have is to make sure people are comfortable with change. That's what I want to bring to people. And AI is changing our industry, and I think we need to be comfortable with that. These are just a few of the organizations that I work with. I worked with the Tampa Bay Rays as they change their workplace. I'm actually working with Amgen Pharmaceuticals as they leverage artificial intelligence for their future, and we'll talk about that. I've worked with Sony PlayStation and many more across this, just local to California as well as across the globe. So what I want to talk to you today about is the evolution of IO psychology. All of us are IO psychologists. We kind of know, I'm not going to take a super deep dive into the evolution, but it does make a point to what the next level or the next evolution of IO psychology will look like. I'm going to talk about what AI means in our workplace. How are we going to leverage artificial intelligence for the applications we use as IO psychologists already? What are those ethical considerations that we want to manage and leverage during this new world? And then how are you going to differentiate yourself as an IO psychologist in the future, leveraging artificial intelligence? And if we have some time, I'll talk about some case studies. I'll definitely talk to you about Amgen Pharmaceuticals and some other local nonprofits that are leveraging artificial intelligence today. So let's jump into the evolution of IO psychology. We all know our industry was launched because we wanted to create more productive and efficient humans. So in the 1910s, we started to talk about how can we make our workplaces more efficient. Everybody knows the Hawthorne stories. Some people think that's the launch or the birth of IO psychology, but I think it happened a little bit before then. And in the 20s and 30s, we started to think about what are the psychological factors we need to address for our employees to make sure they are more efficient and more productive. So we weren't just talking about space. Now we were talking about their psychological and their social needs. And then in the 40s and 50s, we started to identify what were key performance indicators. What personality tests did we need to actually do a job well? Then in the 60s and 70s, we built even more upon that and started to talk about organizational issues. It wasn't just about the person. Now it's about the organization as a whole. How are we going to make sure our leaders are the right leaders to lead this organization? How are we going to ensure our people are happy in their jobs? And then in the 1980s and in the 2000s, we started to think about cognitive psychology. We started to think about specifically focusing on decision-making, utilizing the data that we are constantly collecting to problem solve better, to inform our future, and to make better decisions for our organization and our employees that work in it. So, human-centered artificial intelligence is the next wave. We're no longer in the 1900s, and artificial intelligence is not the future, it is now. We are well into the 21st century, and if we are not thinking about how to leverage artificial intelligence to make our jobs more efficient, just like the sewing machine did for the seamstress, it will pass us by. And I'm here to tell you that I think there's an entire other branch of IO psychology and IO professionals that will be only leveraging artificial intelligence. Organizations will be hiring IO psychologists to help them build artificial intelligence for their organization. That's what the future of our industry looks like. So why does it matter? It matters because we do so many mundane things on a regular basis. Hiring and recruitment is mundane. Performance management is mundane. And let's be honest, no manager wants to do a performance review. Data collection is happening on a regular basis. Why aren't we using real-time data collection? How can we ensure our employees are engaged without sending out an engagement survey? How can we diagnose our organization's concerns, culture, or issues if we don't leverage organizational diagnostics? Because the reality is we collect so much data, but who has time to analyze it? We always have a fire to put out, and there's a ton of data sitting somewhere that we haven't even looked at. And if we actually did that, we might not have as many fires. I also think this information, this data that we collect, and leveraging artificial intelligence to sift through that data is going to help us make better decisions faster. Instead of being behind the market, we'll be ahead of it. We'll be able to predict our future instead of wonder what's going to happen. We might actually reduce bias based on how we build those algorithms. It is our responsibility as IO psychologists to leverage our knowledge on bias reduction to build these artificial intelligence tools. And we'll be able to provide better guidance for our leaders once we've collected and built those systems. We can create bespoke leadership development programs. So just a little bit of fun. Like I said, we have all this data that we collect, but it's like sitting in an inbox somewhere. It's just staring at us, waiting for us to analyze it. But don't you want to be these girls playing in your data, having a really good time, just living your best? I definitely do. This is courtesy of IO Psych memes. If you don't follow them, you should, because they're freaking hilarious. So we collect this data anyways. Why not use it? Right? So right now, what we do is something called resume tracking, right? Everybody knows when you apply for a job, you want to make sure that your resume has the little words that are in the job description so that your resume comes to the top. Believe it or not, that is now an archaic system. We can leverage artificial intelligence to sift through even that level of detail into telling us who are the best candidates that come to the top of that of those resumes that are highlighted or sifted to our HR department. So instead of going through an initial screening to determine whether or not the tracking system actually gave us a good resume, artificial intelligence can do that for us. What it's called is natural language processing. What does that mean? Has anybody tried to go on Yelp recently or TripAdvisor at all? I'm going to Japan this week and for work, and I was just looking up some things on TripAdvisor, and what I learned is that if you scroll to the bottom of the reviews, artificial intelligence gives you a succinct summary of all of the reviews. That's natural language processing. What TripAdvisor has done, and what I believe we should be doing as IO psychologists, is sifting through all of this sentence data, right? Not numeric data, but qualitative data, that's the word I was looking for, to help us get a summary of what everything's being said. It can tell us what the large number of people surveyed say in the span of literally 30 minutes, what might take us weeks, months. We can also leverage artificial intelligence to do the initial interview screening. So we're not using HR's time by determining whether or not this person's actually the resume that they say that they are. The artificial intelligence robot we design can do that for us. And then we can predict how successful that candidate might be in the job itself. And we may even be able to determine if we can reduce turnover. So no longer will we be stuck in this 18-month to 2-year, I don't know if this new hire is going to really work out. Artificial intelligence can tell us before that, saving our organization a lot of money. Does anybody know the stat on what it takes to replace an employee when they leave?
Salary and a half.
What'd you say? Salary and a half. Exactly. Although some new data will tell you 2.5 times.
Wow.
It's pretty intense. One of my clients, God bless them, have spent 2 years trying to source one role. 2 years. So the time it took for them to go through the number of candidates in those 24 months, not to mention the fact that the role is actually empty, is so costly for the organization. if we, as IO psychologists, start to say, look, there's a whole department we could create that would make your lives much faster, we would be creating a new space for ourselves.